For decades, the story of John F. Kennedy's assassination has really only been told from one side, the American side. But what if there was a whole other narrative, one that's been locked away in a Moscow archive this whole time? Well, today we're prying open a recently surfaced Soviet dossier, and it gives us a completely new window into one of the most pivotal and terrifying moments of the 20th century.
All right, let's get into it. This file was absolutely never meant for Western eyes. What we have here is the raw, unfiltered, top-secret reaction from inside the Soviet Union as the news of Kennedy's death broke, a moment when the entire world was holding its breath.
And right away, the first documents reveal something shocking. It's not a calculated conspiracy. It's not celebration. It's pure, overwhelming fear. The Kremlin's first instinct was absolute panic. They were terrified of getting blamed and even more terrified of what a grieving, angry America might do next.
But to really understand why they were so scared, you have to get into their very direct and very, very complicated history with the man at the center of it all, Lee Harvey Oswald. See, he wasn't some stranger to them, not at all.
The dossier lays out this whole timeline. Oswald just shows up in 1959, this ex-Marine full of what he thinks are communist ideals. But when they initially reject his request for citizenship, he does something incredibly drastic. He slashes his wrists in his hotel room. And that act basically forces the Soviets' hand. They end up granting him residency and shipping him off to a factory in Minsk, keeping him far away from the real center of power.
And this is where you see this huge disconnect. Oswald saw himself as this true believer, this important defector ready to hand over military secrets. But the KGB? Oh, they saw something completely different. Their internal reports basically paint a picture of a mentally unstable, unpredictable guy, a liability. He was a problem they had to manage, for sure, but he was absolutely not someone they would ever trust to be an agent.
Okay, so with Oswald now back in America, pretty much off their radar, the news that comes out of Dallas on November 22, 1963, sends an absolute shockwave through the Kremlin. Their former problem had just become the world's biggest crisis. And get this, the dossier gives us Nikita Khrushchev's personal, immediate reaction. He was at his country house, his dacha, and when he hears the news, he immediately quotes Lenin, saying, "We will go another way," was his way of declaring that real communists don't use individual acts of terror. It was a crystal clear attempt to create ideological distance between the Soviet Union and this murder.
The dossier just makes it so clear. The Kremlin's main worry wasn't who did it. It was how is the U.S. going to react. They were scared that some group of madmen, as they put it, could use the chaos to seize power, or that this was all just a setup for another invasion of Cuba. And looming over all of it was the ultimate fear, that one wrong move, one misunderstanding, could accidentally trigger a nuclear war.
So faced with this unbelievable crisis, the shock inside the Kremlin quickly shifts into a very careful, very calculated diplomatic strategy. Their goal was simple: survival. They had to de-escalate this, and fast.
And what they did was actually pretty brilliant. It was this deliberate three-part response. First, publicly offer condolences to show solidarity. Second, send a very high-level official, Anastas Mikoyan, to the funeral as a major sign of respect. And then the third step, the most important one, they proactively offered to give the Americans their entire top-secret file on Lee Harvey Oswald.
You have to understand, in the middle of the Cold War, this was a stunning move. The dossier actually records that the American Secretary of State was just completely taken by surprise. This wasn't some clever political maneuver. This was a genuine, almost desperate move by the Soviets to prove they had nothing to hide and to stop a catastrophic misunderstanding before it started. And right in the middle of all this high-stakes, world-on-the-brink diplomacy, the file captures this really profound human moment. It mentions a letter sent from Jacqueline Kennedy to Khrushchev during her last few nights in the White House, thanking him for his sympathy and saying she hoped her husband's work for peace would continue.
So after going through this entire secret file, what's the final verdict? What does this dossier really tell us about that moment in history?
So here's the bottom line. The dossier doesn't solve the mystery of who killed JFK, but it does solve a different one. It pretty much proves it wasn't the Soviets. It paints this incredible picture of a superpower that, in a moment of extreme crisis, was just as confused, just as frightened, and just as desperate to avoid a war as everyone else. So, how does this change the story we all think we know? It forces us to look past the simple narrative of two big, aggressive enemies constantly at each other's throats. It reminds us that behind that Iron Curtain, behind all the political posturing, the leaders on both sides knew they were walking on a tightrope over an abyss. And maybe, just maybe, they were only one tragic misunderstanding away from falling.